Hello folks, my name is Leah Bonasake. Welcome to Master Lab Systems. Today we'll be looking at implementing GraphQL APIs with Python FastAPI. Okay? What is GraphQL? So GraphQL is a query language for APIs. It allows clients to request the exact data they require or whatever they need. It replaces traditional REST with more flexible data fetching, which is developed by Meta, which is more of a derived name from Facebook, which is in open source now. Okay, so let's look at the differences between REST and GraphQL. So first of all, if we look at the feature side, so in terms of its features between the REST and GraphQL, so when we talk about REST, so for example, an overfetching. So REST, it's common that whenever you send a request, you will get high results if you are not limiting, of course, or you are not using the pagination technique. So if we look at it in GraphQL, so that is completely avoided because in GraphQL you only fetch what you need. So there is no reason why you would fetch or why you do overfetching mainly, and also to bring back your whole database. So again, underfetching in REST, that's highly common because of if you are not using pagination, you can underfetch your results. If you are limiting, you can underfetch your results. However, in GraphQL, that's also completely avoided because of you only request what you need based on your query. Again, looking at REST, we can get multiple endpoints. Imagine you have a user service that should allow you to create, read, and update and delete, for example. So you'd have about 4 endpoints. However, in REST, in GraphQL, that is also completely avoided. You will only have one endpoint, which is your GraphQL endpoint, and then you just use your query statements to query based on to query what you need or do the operation that you need. Again, we'll look at REST. We'll look at GraphQL on how it does or how it handles those queries. Okay. So again, why use GraphQL with FastAPI? FastAPI, as we know, FastAPI is a modern asynchronous and a developer-friendly framework, a Python framework which is widely adopted lately for developing fast, responsive, or performance APIs in Python. GraphQL makes APIs more flexible and client-driven. Also, combining both gives you a powerful tool for backend services, meaning if you combine both GraphQL and FastAPI, you get a powerful tool for backend services, which is also great for your front-end heavy applications. Let's look at the tools required for this tutorial. So we only require FastAPI, which is your framework, your Python framework, your Strawberry library for GraphQL, and a Uvicorn, which is your web server to serve your application, and also Python for developing. Let's look at the basic structure that we'll use or what will require for us to get started when we are setting up this GraphQL API with Python FastAPI. So again, first of all, what we need is to install the dependencies. Again, I will be using my pre-existing repo, which is available on my GitHub account. Link will be provided as well. So again, we're just going to keep on adding on top of it. So first of all, first step is to install the dependency, which is the Strawberry GraphQL dependency and the Uvicorn server and the FastAPI. So which is already, if you are using Poetry as your build tool or your dependency management in Python, instead of using pip, you can just copy the command, which is Poetry add FastAPI Strawberry GraphQL Uvicorn. Automatically it will download those and unpack them for you and get them ready for your API. Okay, so looking at the basic structure, so again, that's what pretty much we need. It's the schema and also your invoking, which is your main file to invoke your schema. But of course, we'll be looking at that in the actual code. So again, that's the example of GraphQL in action. So how it works is that instead of getting a Swagger schema, you get your GraphQL page or your GraphQL front end, which runs, of course, which is being served, of course, by a project. As soon as you automatically install or you add the dependency for GraphQL, it automatically allows you to be able to interact it via the browser using your GraphQL endpoint. So again, we'll be looking at that as well in the code. So before looking at the best practices, let's go ahead and start our implementation of GraphQL. Okay, so what I will bring now, it's my PyCharm, which is my IDE, so we can look at what we need. So again, first of all, let's go back to our project. So I will be using Linux as well for this demo. So if I do a cd, just so you can see the project itself. Okay, so again, this is how it looks. Let me just take it to my IDE. So in the IDE, this is what we have. So again, the focus will be on the GraphQL folder, meaning on your GraphQL package. So again, as I said, what you need, if you haven't added yet your GraphQL, let's look at poetry add. Okay, so again, I have already run this command. So again, this is the command you would need to run. So let me press it again, although it won't do anything, but of course it might just create a conflict. So this is the command you would need to add your GraphQL to your application. Of course, if you already have FastAPI and a Uvicorn web server, you don't need to add those as well. You can just simply add the Strawberry GraphQL, which is your library to interact or to develop your GraphQL APIs. So of course, I've already done that. So I'll simply just go ahead and show you when it has already been added. So again, looking at my structure, which is my basic project structure. Okay, let me just remove this. Okay, so what we have again, on your dependency file, which is instead of requirements.txt, 8x since I'm using Poetry as my dependency manager or my builder tool. So in Poetry, if you create a project in Poetry, automatically it comes in with this pyproject.yml, which is a dependency file. So of course, automatically when you add a new dependency, it automatically comes in here. So as you can see, this is my Strawberry GraphQL. It has already been added successfully. So now we can start developing our API. So again, the focus, as I said, the focus will be here. So what we will be doing this time, we'll create a simple API. So first of all, let's first look at what we have. So of course, the API is what we will be using to invoke our schema. So let's look at the schema now. So if we create something called, or a file called schema, we have created a file called schema. So what I will just do, I'm just going to explain this in a bit. So for now, let's hash this one. So as I said, how GraphQL works is that instead of using those get, post, delete, or put methods in GraphQL uses something called a query. So for example, there is a query types. These queries have got some types. So there is a query, and there's a query type, and there's a mutation type, So in a query type, you only use a query type if you want to read something, or if you want to read some data from your server or from your database, wherever, from your source. You only use a query if you want to read something, So, and then from getting that, as you can see, this class is a basic query class. So again, by defining this class as query, it means in GraphQL, this will be saving, or it will only be reading something, So again, looking at the second one, which is this one now. So again, for this one, if we were to use now, which is the second type of a query, which is a mutation, mutation now would mean only comes in three forms. In mutation, what you can do, you can update, you can delete, or you can create a new object or a new data. So that's what mutation would mean in GraphQL. So again, if we were to create a new object to the server, we would have to use the mutation as your type. Using the mutation as your type will allow you to be able to create a new object, to delete or to update it. However, if you are to use a query type, so it means you are only reading, not updating or deleting or doing anything else, but just to read. That's what query means. So mutation, if you are updating, deleting, or creating something new, you would have to use a mutation query. So hence now you see these queries, I've splitted them together so they don't create any confusion or any conflict there. So again, let's look at the first query. I'm just going to start it up, but the second one will be creating together. So again, if we start it up, this one, so let's look at what it does again. So meaning this query, what it does, it gets what? It gets an input, of course. From that input, well, not even an input, by calling this hello, this is what it gets returned because it's not getting any input. So but we'll look at the one that gets an input from the user. So let's look at this one again. So if I were to save this now, this query, so again, what we're expecting is to get again this hello from GraphQL. So let's go ahead and start it up at this project. So again, starting it up would mean I have to be in the directory where this project or where this file is, because of I'm invoking this schema from my API file. So I have to be in this folder where this API file is located. Okay, so again, cd to GraphQL, so I can be in that same directory. So again, let's use the PythonRun command. So again, if we use PythonRun Uvicorn, which is on our web server, API is the file and APIDevelopment. Okay, let's run that. See what we will get. Okay, so it has started successfully. So what we need to go now on the browser. So again, GraphQL is running on port 8000, of course. That's the endpoint for GraphQL. So automatically, when you are initiating or when you have created your schema, what you need now, it's basically either a main file to invoke and also to expose your GraphQL endpoint, because of for you to be able to access the GraphQL endpoint or the GraphQL via the browser, you have to have an invoker file, meaning something similar to this one, so that exposes that GraphQL endpoint. So as you can see, this is what we have in our case. So hence we are able to access GraphQL on our port 8000 because of, again, our project runs on port 8000. So again, it just appends the GraphQL prefix or endpoint name to our localhost port. Okay, so again, as I said, we will be invoking the hello from GraphQL. We'll be invoking the hello, which is this class query. This is what we'll be invoking. So again, we should be returning the hello from GraphQL. So if we go ahead, let's look at this one. Let's look at this one. So again, okay, so I'm just gonna comment this. So if we look at it now, so this is how we can write our query if we want to interact with our application. So this is a GraphQL query. So again, it's pretty much simple, not fancy. So it's a query, open a column, you calibrate braces, and of course you invoke the function you are calling, so which is a hello in this case. So let's look at what it returns. So let's execute. Okay, as you can see, your response is successful, automatically we are able to get the response from our GraphQL server. Moving on, let's now look at the second endpoint, which is the mutation. So again, this one, I'm going to explain it as well in a minute. So looking at the mutation one, this is what it would mean. As I said, only if you are reading something, you are using a query type class. But if you want to do something from the server, that's where you have to use the mutation query type. So looking at that, I'll hash this one. Let's look at the second one. So okay, looking at this one, let's just again add the query to the schema, which is, I'm commenting this line. Okay, of course we don't have this query, so let me just take it off because I've hashed it out, and either way I already have added it to the schema. So let's go ahead and comment that one. So again, as I'm saying in this one, it means that now we are getting what? Something from the user, and we are returning something. So hence in this one, what we see, we are using the what? The mutation query type instead of using what? The query type. Okay, so running that, it means now again we get the user and then we return the hello user based on what? On your input. Okay, so if again just to look at our web server. Okay, let's save that. Okay, let's save that. Okay, my bad. What I need to do, put it back in. Okay, just gonna again have this one in there, which is still fine. Just comment this one live. Okay, let's look at our web server. Okay, just started successfully, fine. So again, now our pass the parameter which is in the name, since it expects a parameter which is in the string format, and it assigns that to a name and then it returns that. Okay, so let's look at how we can structure the query for that one. So again, let's look at this one, to our second query. I'm just going to unhash this. Okay, so what it means now, so let's put something in there. So again, as I said, this is what? A mutation query, not a query type. This is a mutation query type. So again, since it expects something and returns something, so it has to be a mutation, not a normal query type. So again, what it does, invoke the function, which is what it has to know, which is a create function, which gets what? A name in the string format. Of course, it gets the name in the string format and returns a string as well. So as you can see again, so it gets invoke the function name, pass the parameter as input, you pass your parameter, which is your input, and you run the query. Let's look at what we will be getting in this case. Of course, we should get hello master lab. That's the expected results. But of course, let's execute the query and look at what the results becomes. Okay. Nice. As you can see, folks, again we are getting back our expected results from our GraphQL API. So this from our GraphQL server. Yes. Okay, so now what we'll be doing now, we'll run our last query before we end the session. Okay, so as you can see, again our mutation query works. So now what we'll be doing now as our last query is to register a new user. Let's say we are creating a user registration form, for example, which takes what? A username, email, and a password, and assigns and saves that to a database, or not even to save, but it gets those from the user input and attempts to register to a user base. to use the database. So let's look at how that can be. Of course, the query type that we will be using, it's a mutation. Since we are creating something new, not reading. So we are creating something new, so we have to use the mutation as the query type. Okay? Same goes if we were to delete an object, we were to use a mutation to delete that. It goes back to the name, as I said. In GraphQL, you only get what you have requested. Okay? So, moving ahead, let's look at how now we will create our registration form, for example. Okay? So what we have here, I'm just going to close and start it up again. So what we have in here, we have a user, which is a user model, to put it like that. So imagine this is a user model that gets the register input, which is gets a what? A username in the format of a string, it gets the email in the format of a string, it gets the password in the format of a string, and a return, and also this is what it should return to you. Of course, a successful message, a success, which is a boolean. So a success would mean if registered, then it's gonna be true. However, if not registered, then it will be false, and a success message, that's what you should be getting. So basically, this is just a response of what you should be getting back, or based on your successful registration. So again, let's look at our API. Well, we don't really need this because of the API just creates what our, or just ties our application or our endpoint to our application. So let's look at the schema, because what we need is the schema more, since it is the schema that contains the most of the logic. Okay, let's add one endpoint. So let's look at that. Adding one endpoint with me now. Just gonna get my code. I already have it in there. Okay, so okay, let's look at this new query now. Okay, so again, we just need to fix the indent. Let's go ahead and fix the indent. Okay, I'm just going to comment out this one. Let's say we'll put it in there. Let me just comment out. We'll take out this one. Okay, and fix out the indentation. Okay. Okay, let's look at that. Okay, so again, have to define the class, since this has to be under the class mutation, since this is a what? A mutation query, so it has to be under the class mutation, because of we are creating something from the server. So again, this is a mutation query, not a normal query to read, or a query type. Okay, so again, or maybe let me just take off just to ensure simplicity and the cleanness of the code. So this is what we have, and then save that. So again, what it means is that upon registration, we are getting what? Your input. Your input is to contain what? Register input. So this is what it needs to contain. It needs to contain username, email, and password. So again, looking at your response, which is your response, and it outputs a what? A response in that format of a message and a boolean and a success. So meaning this is what it needs your response it has to contain. So again, let's ensure that our application is running. So again, this is pretty much simple. Again, it's not saving anything to our DB, but it's just getting those from the user input. If they are complete or they've been validated, fine, then this is the return, this is the register, the response that you should be getting back, which is your user register successfully. However, if not, then it will give you an error message saying what missing required fields. As you can see, the success is going to be false in this case, but it's going to be true if everything we needed is been provided successfully. So if we save that, folks, and restart our web server, okay, our web server is already running fine. So let's go ahead and run that. So let's look at this last query now. I'm just gonna rehash it. So again, as I said, this is a mutation query, so hence we have to use what? A mutation query type. So again, function we are invoking, it's register, which is what you can see at our IDE. So def register, so we are invoking this function, which is register, and it gets what? An input in that format. So again, let's go back to our browser. So it gets what? An input in that format of a username, and there's our username, and an email is that our email, and our password. Of course, you can't use that password for production systems, but of course this is a demo, so we have to use a lead dummy password. So again, it gets the password file, and this is now the output, meaning the returns the response. So it needs to throw a success message, a success, and a message itself. So let's run this query, folks, and see what we'll be getting back. Sweet. As you can see, the success is through and the message is user registered successfully, meaning in GraphQL it makes it simplifies it easier to communicate with the APIs or to consume those APIs without having to query more data or to underfetch or to overfetch. So again, imagine if now we didn't provide a password, we wanted to register a user without having a password. Let's look at that. Of course, right now we know that the success should be false and the user message has, of course, throw something else, not to throw that one. So let's go ahead and run this query. Okay, as you can see, folks, it means now data is now because of what? Field register input, which is what? In that register model has got that field which is missing. So of course now we know that we didn't provide the password, so hence again we definitely need to provide a password. So if again we click to our query, again we get a successful response. Okay, folks, I think I will end here for today's demo. So again, let's just finalize our presentation. So of course, as you have seen how GraphQL is and what GraphQL can do, I assuming for now that you will be quietly adopting it to your APIs. So again, the best practices for using GraphQL with FastAPI is that again, you definitely have to use kinetic models to validate your data instead of relying to what GraphQL will say. So of course, instead of allowing GraphQL to throw that error whereby it said like that null point error that said like the user not registered for a missing queue, it's important to have a validator that checks your user input before you can even try to save it to a database. And also use the async resolvers for database calls, which is also very important. Make sure you add your error handling and logging. As you've seen in my case, instead of returning that from an API, I rather return something meaningful or a meaningful message to your users. And also log each response whenever you are sending a query to your API. Again, ensure that your GraphQL endpoint is not public. It's safe and secured. So meaning instead of API case exposing it as is like that, which is what we can say directly. So you might of course want to take some security precautions or security measures to ensure that your GraphQL API or your GraphQL endpoint is secured. Okay, so let's look at real world use cases for GraphQL. So of course, GraphQL is widely used in mobile applications, since you only fetch what you need, or you only fetch pasting on what you have. So that's GraphQL for you. Also, it is very widely used in analytical dashboards and also in microservices, pretty much being standard as the developer tools and APIs. So of course, people in our companies are currently adopting the GraphQL, so which is, as you guys will see, even Meta, Facebook are pretty much using GraphQL to develop their APIs. So again, folks, if you have any questions or you have any comments you want to provide those in the comment section below, I will ensure to answer those your questions, and also feel free to like and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, folks, appreciate it. Cheers, peace, thank you.